now let's get to the what next for the Raiders. What a job now to try and clean this up, and that locker room must be filled with tons of players who feel violated. You know what I mean? Like for the players of color, for Carl Nassib, for the players that were rallying around their teammates of color and Carl Nassib, to think that was Gruden full of it the entire time, and that's going to be something if Jon wants to deal with these men to try and rectify in the middle of a season that just 8 days ago when they took to the field here in Los Angeles and SoFi, they were 3-0, and we're talking about a Super Bowl potential campaign for this team. I cannot imagine. What is the plan, do you think, here to try and rectify all this, coaching staff and everything else?
I'm not sure what you can do. I mean, Gruden's gone and he isn't going to be back. Rich Bisaccia takes over, but Bisaccia's got ties to Gruden. If I'm a player on that locker room, I look at Bisaccia and say, well, why should I regard him any differently right now than I would regard Jon Gruden? Which guy on this staff can I trust? Which guy can I not trust? How many of these guys are just like Gruden? And here's the problem with Gruden. This goes back years. Chris Sims talked about it today on PFT Live. He played for Gruden in Tampa Bay 2003 to 2006. And I used to do weekly radio with Steve Dumig. He passed away a couple of years ago, but Dumig told me back when Gruden was the Buccaneers coach that he had a well-earned reputation for saying one thing, doing another, being extremely and blatantly two-faced. And Sims tells those stories how he'll be talking about a guy and saying horrible things about him, and the guy walks into the room, hey, man, I love you, you're my guy. Players are smart enough to figure that out. And that reputation hung with Gruden his entire time as a head coach. And I think that's part of the confusion now for the players who maybe weren't clued into that yet, who hadn't been around long enough to understand it. They're going to be confused. And I think the question becomes, in whom do you put your trust now that Gruden is gone, but all the guys Gruden hired to help him coach are still there? That's going to be the challenge, is getting those players to turn the page on Jon Gruden. And it becomes a challenge for Mark Davis. It becomes a challenge for Mike Mayock. It becomes a challenge for Rich Bisaccia and everyone else in the power structure there.
Because you and I were bandying it about first blush last night on halftime of the Westwood One Monday Night Football broadcast. Gus Bradley was a name that we brought up, and he's one of those sunny disposition, high energy Pete Carroll type guys that I'm wondering if they didn't turn to him because obviously he has head coaching experience in Jacksonville, because the defense has gone so well with him locking down on that they don't want him now handling all phases and figuring out when to call timeouts and things like that, right? Maybe that was the decision?
I guess that's it. But, Rich, he's one of the few guys on that staff that I think the locker room would look to and say he's really not a quote-unquote Gruden guy.
Right.
He's the guy who was brought in after the first Gruden guy was made a scapegoat because the defense wasn't good enough and Paul Gunther got thrown overboard. So Gus Bradley's the guy to come fix it. I mean, Bradley and Gruden were together for 5 games, and I think Bradley would have had an easier time than Bisaccia to get the players at large to distinguish and differentiate and distance Gruden from the assistant head coach. That really, to me, and I hadn't thought about it until we have had this conversation, but I don't know that Bisaccia is the right choice just from that standpoint. I think you need distance from Gruden, or you're still going to have guys in the locker room not really understanding what the hell's going on. And it doesn't take much to throw a guy off when you're talking about these very physical and emotionally draining games that we see teams playing each and every week, one after another.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.